She stood in the rain, 8 months pregnant, locked out of the mansion. She called home, and the man inside didn't even look up from his dinner. That night changed everything, not just for Elena Voss, for every single person who thought Damien Cross was untouchable. If you've ever been discarded by someone you gave everything to, this story is for you. Stay until the very end, because what these brothers do next will leave you breathless. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Başakir. The rain came down in sheets, the kind that soaks through clothing in seconds and turns Chicago sidewalks into shallow rivers. Elena Voss stood at the iron gate of the Cross Estate on North Burling Street and pressed her palm flat against the call panel. The panel blinked once, red, and the screen read, "Access denied." She pressed it again. Access denied. She could see the house from here. Through the tall arched windows of the dining room, warm amber light glowed against the storm. Candles on the long mahogany table. Two figures seated across from each other, close enough that their conversation required no raised voice. Close enough that when the woman laughed, the man across from her smiled. A real smile. Not the controlled, calculated expression Elena had watched him perform at fundraisers and business dinners for the last 4 years. Damien Cross was smiling at Vivian Laurent the way he used to smile at Elena. Elena pressed the call panel a third time and held it. Nothing. She took a step back and looked at the garage door to her left. Through the small square window near the top, she could make out the shape of cardboard boxes stacked against the far wall. Her boxes. She recognized the blue masking tape she used to seal them when she'd packed away her nursing textbooks last spring, thinking she'd unpack them when things settled down. When the marriage found its footing again, the boxes were there. Her keycard was dead. The rain was not stopping. She pressed both hands against the gate and leaned her forehead against the cold iron bars, closing her eyes. Her back had been aching since morning, a low, grinding pressure that radiated down into her hips whenever she stood too long. The baby moved, a slow roll beneath her ribs, and she exhaled hard through her nose. "Okay," she whispered, to no one, to herself, to the child who had no idea what kind of world she was about to enter. "Okay." She pulled out her phone and called Damien's cell. 1 ring, 2 rings. Through the dining room window, she watched him reach into his jacket pocket, glance at the screen, and set the phone face down on the table without answering. He knew she was at the gate. He had looked at her name on that screen and set the phone back down and picked up his wine glass instead. Elena's throat tightened. She did not cry. She had cried enough in the last 6 weeks that her body had developed a kind of resistance to it, the way skin eventually stops blistering if you press it against the same heat long enough. Instead, she stood there in the rain, one hand braced against the gate, the other pressed flat to the side of her belly, and she looked at the man she had married and waited for him to feel the weight of what he was doing. He did not look up. She was still standing there 8 minutes later when the headlights came. 4 vehicles turned onto North Burling from the south, moving slowly through the rain with the kind of unhurried precision that had nothing to do with caution and everything to do with control. They were not luxury cars. They were the kind of vehicles that said the people inside did not care about being seen. A black GMC Yukon, 2 dark-colored F-150s, and a Suburban that Elena recognized even before it stopped because of the dent above the rear left wheel well. Her brother Marcus had put that dent there in a parking garage in Wicker Park 3 summers ago and never got it fixed because he said it gave the truck character. The vehicles parked in a line along the curb, blocking the entire front of the Cross Estate. 4 men stepped out. Marcus came first, the oldest, 41 years old, with the wide shoulders and the slow, deliberate movement of someone who had long ago stopped needing to prove anything with speed. Behind him came Daniel, who was 38 and ran a contracting company in Bridgeport and had hands that looked like they'd been built for a different era. Then Joel, 34, who was the quiet one, the one whose silence always contained more menace than other men shouting. And last came Theo, who was 29 and the youngest, and who had not yet learned to keep his face as controlled as his brother's, so his expression right now, as he walked toward the gate and saw Elena standing there soaked through, one hand on her belly, her hair matted flat against the side of her face, showed something raw and unguarded that the older brothers had trained out of themselves years ago. Theo made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Marcus reached Elena first. He put both hands on her shoulders and looked at her face. He did not say anything right away. He was reading her the way he'd always read her since she was 7 years old, and came home from school with a split lip and refused to tell anyone who'd done it. He could look at her and know things she hadn't said. He looked at her now, and his jaw tightened. "How long have you been standing here?" he said. "Not long." "Elena." 20 minutes, she said. "Maybe a little more." Marcus looked at the gate, then at the house, then at the two figures still visible through the dining room window. His hands dropped from her shoulders. Daniel had moved to stand beside her without her noticing. He put his coat around her, a heavy canvas work jacket that smelled like sawdust and cold air, and pulled it closed over her shoulders without saying a word. Joel was already walking the perimeter of the fence line, hands in his pockets, his eyes moving with the systematic attention of someone cataloging information rather than reacting to it. Theo was staring at the house. "He's in there right now," Theo said. It was not a question. "Leave it alone," Elena said. "He's in there with her right now, while you're standing outside in the—" "Theo." Marcus said the name once, flatly, and Theo stopped. There was a silence in which the only sound was rain against pavement and the distant rumble of a delivery truck somewhere on the cross street. "We're taking you out of here," Marcus said, turning back to Elena. "Tonight. You're not going back inside that house. My things are in the garage. We'll get your things. I have—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "Mom's journal is in one of those boxes. I need to make sure it doesn't get left behind." "It won't." She looked at him. She had always trusted his certainty more than other people's reassurances because his certainty came from somewhere different. Not from wanting to comfort her, but from actually intending to follow through. He had never told her something was going to be okay unless he was already working on making it okay. "All right," she said. The five of them moved toward the vehicles. Elena walked carefully, one hand still pressed to her side, the baby's weight shifting with each step. She was almost to the Suburban when the front door of the Cross estate opened. Damian Cross stood in the doorway. He was wearing a charcoal dinner jacket, no tie, and his dark hair was slightly disheveled in the way that cost expensive stylists significant effort to achieve. He was 44 years old and looked, as he always looked, like a man who had never been genuinely surprised by anything in his adult life. He held a glass of red wine loosely in one hand, and he stood in the frame of his own front door and looked out at the four men standing in the rain in front of his gate and at the woman walking toward their vehicles in a coat that didn't belong to her. His expression did not change. "Elena," he said. His voice carried easily across the rain, controlled and even. "This is unnecessary." She stopped walking but did not turn around. "Come inside," he said. "We can discuss this reasonably." Marcus turned around. He looked at Damian the way you look at something you've fully assessed and made a decision about. "She's leaving," Marcus said. "We're getting her things from your garage and she's leaving. That's all that's happening tonight." Damian's eyes moved to Marcus with the careful attention of a man recalibrating. He had met Marcus Voss twice. He understood, in the abstract, that Elena's brothers were not people to dismiss. But there was a layer of insulation that extreme wealth and institutional power provides, a sense that consequences operate differently for people in certain positions, and Damian Cross had lived inside that insulation for long enough that it had become indistinguishable from the natural order of things. "I wasn't speaking to you," Damian said. "I know you weren't," Marcus said, "but that's who answered." A long pause. Rain. The distant sound of traffic on North Avenue. Damian looked at Elena again. "This is how you want to do this? With your brothers standing in the street like we're in some kind of—" "Open the garage," Elena said. She turned around and looked at him directly for the first time since the gate had denied her access card. Her face was wet. Her eyes were steady. "Open the garage so my brothers can get my belongings. That's all I'm asking from you right now. Just open the garage." Something moved across Damian's face. Something complicated and brief that might have been, in a different man, the beginning of shame, but it resolved quickly into the familiar, controlled blankness, and he looked at the gate panel and pressed something on his phone, and the garage door began to roll upward. He went back inside without another word. Elena turned back to the vehicles. She did not watch the door close. The four brothers worked with the efficiency of men who had grown up helping each other move, load, stack, and carry without wasted motion or unnecessary conversation. The boxes were heavy with books and nursing equipment and the accumulated weight of a woman's life packed in too much haste. Theo found the box with the blue masking tape and handed it to Elena directly, and she held it against her chest with both arms and stood by the Suburban while her brothers finished loading. By the time the garage door rolled back down, the rain had eased slightly. Not stopped, just reduced from something punishing to something merely persistent. Elena climbed carefully into the passenger seat of the Suburban and set the blue-taped box on her lap. She pressed her hands flat against the top of it. Inside was her mother's journal, a green hardcover notebook with a broken spine and a water stain on the lower right corner and 53 pages of her mother's handwriting, documenting a life that had ended too soon. She had been carrying it with her, metaphorically, for 2 decades. Now she was carrying it literally, out of the house of a man who had treated it like storage. Marcus got into the driver's seat. He started the engine and turned the heat on full and did not say anything. They pulled away from North Burling and the Cross estate disappeared in the rear-view mirror. Elena watched it go. She had met Damien Cross 3 years and 7 months ago in the emergency room of Northwestern Memorial Hospital on a Thursday night in November. She had been 29 years old, 8 months out of her nursing degree, working the overnight shift with a competence that surprised the senior nurses, because most people 8 months out of school still moved with visible uncertainty, the constant low-grade fear that they might miss something critical. Elena did not move that way. She had spent 4 years watching her father work 2 jobs, and her brothers navigate a world that consistently underestimated them. And she had decided early that the best response to a world that underestimated you was technical excellence. You became so precise and so capable that the underestimation became the problem of the people doing it, not you. Damien had been brought in by 2 men who were clearly not his friends in any meaningful sense. They were employees, the kind who maintain an expression of professional concern that has nothing to do with actual concern. He had a laceration above his left eyebrow and 2 broken ribs, and his blood pressure was elevated in a way that suggested the injuries were not entirely recent, and that he had been operating on adrenaline for longer than was medically advisable. Elena had treated him the way she treated everyone. Efficient, direct, no unnecessary warmth, but no coldness either. She had cleaned the laceration and assessed the ribs and documented everything with the same systematic attention she brought to every patient. What had distinguished Damien Cross from every other patient she treated that night was that he had looked at her without any of the usual performances people put on in emergency rooms. He was not performing toughness for the employees in the corner. He was not performing gratitude. He was not performing anything. He was just in genuine pain and looking at the person managing that pain and responding honestly to the care being delivered. "You're not afraid of me," he'd said at one point while she was applying steri strips to the laceration. "Should I be?" she'd said without looking up from what she was doing. "Most people are. Most people aren't trying to assess whether you need a CT scan." He had made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly stopped by the pain in his ribs. "Do I need a CT scan?" "Probably not, but I'm going to order one anyway because I'd rather be wrong about that in the direction of caution." He had looked at her for a moment with the focused attention of someone experiencing something unfamiliar. Then he said, "All right." And that was it. That was the whole of it. She ordered the scan. It came back negative for anything critical. She discharged him with instructions for the ribs and a warning about the blood pressure, and she moved on to the next patient. He came back the following Thursday. Not as a patient. He had walked into the emergency department waiting room at 11:15 at night and asked the front desk nurse if Elena Voss was working. She had been. She had come out to find him standing there in clothes that cost more than her monthly rent, holding 2 cups of coffee from a place that didn't do to-go orders, looking slightly uncertain in a way that was very clearly unfamiliar to him. "I was in the neighborhood," he'd said. "Nobody in those shoes is ever in this neighborhood," she'd said. He'd held out one of the coffees. "I wanted to say thank you properly. You could have sent a card." "I thought about it." She'd looked at him for a moment. She'd had 3 hours left on her shift in a waiting room with 14 people in it and absolutely no business entertaining whatever this was. She took the coffee. "You have about 4 minutes," she said. "Talk fast." He had laughed, a real one this time, without the broken ribs to stop it. And something in that laugh, genuine and slightly surprised, like he hadn't expected to use it, had stayed with her in a way she spent the next several weeks trying not to think too hard about. They had coffee twice more before she agreed to dinner. They had dinner 4 times before he told her what he actually did. She had already suspected. A man who came into an emergency room with broken ribs and men who looked like that standing in the corner was not running a nonprofit. But Damien had looked at her across the table at the 4th dinner and said, "I want to tell you something before you hear it from someone else." And then he had told her with the same directness he'd shown in the hospital. No performance, no euphemism. And she had sat with the information for a full 60 seconds before responding. "Are people in danger because of what you do?" she'd said. "Yes," he said. "Sometimes." "Are you in danger?" "Yes. Sometimes." "And what do you want from me?" He had looked at her with that same focused attention, the one that said he was experiencing something unfamiliar. "I don't know yet," he'd said. "I've never done this before." She should have walked. Any reasonable reading of the situation pointed clearly toward walking. She had 4 brothers who would have agreed unanimously. But Elena Voss had spent her adult life in emergency rooms, which meant she had developed a particular relationship to the space between what something looked like and what it actually was. She had learned to see past presentation to condition, and the condition she saw in Damien Cross was a man who had built an enormous, complex, and genuinely dangerous life around himself, and was, in some very fundamental way, completely alone inside it. She knew what that felt like. Not the danger, not the power, but the aloneness. She hadn't walked. Now, 3 years and 7 months later, she was sitting in her brother's truck with her mother's journal pressed against her chest and a child turning slowly beneath her ribs, leaving behind a house where her keycard no longer worked. Marcus drove without speaking for 12 blocks. Then he said, without looking at her, "You told him about the baby." It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "And?" She looked out the window at the wet Chicago streets, the amber blur of streetlights reflected in standing water, the particular nighttime texture of the city that she had loved her whole life and that had never felt this hostile. "He said the timing was complicated," she said. Silence. "The timing," Marcus said. "That's what he said." Another silence, longer. The windshield wipers moved back and forth with mechanical regularity. "When did you tell him?" Marcus said. 6 weeks ago." She felt, rather than saw, the change that moved through her brother. It was subtle. A slight shift in how he was holding his hands on the wheel, a barely perceptible tightening around the jaw. Marcus had always communicated his most dangerous states of mind through stillness rather than movement. The angrier he was, the quieter he became. Right now he had gone very, very quiet. 6 weeks, he said. "Yes." "And in 6 weeks he moved Vivienne Laurent into your home." "He didn't move her in," Elena said. "She was there for dinner." "Elena." She turned to look at him. "She was there for dinner," Marcus said, "and you were standing at the gate in the rain." She didn't have anything to say to that, because it was true. And because the truth of it was exactly as straightforward and exactly as devastating as it sounded, and there was no frame or context that softened it into something more manageable. She turned back to the window. "I need you to tell me something," Marcus said, and his voice had shifted now, something in it more careful, the way he spoke when he was about to ask something he already knew the answer to, and was giving her the opportunity to confirm it before he acted on what he knew. "I need you to tell me if you're all right." "I'm fine," she said. "Elena." "I'm fine, Marcus. I'm tired, and my back hurts, and I'm going to have a baby in 6 weeks, and I just got locked out of my house, but I am fine." He nodded slowly. He did not push it. They drove the rest of the way to Bridgeport in silence, through the rain, the box pressed against her chest, the baby moving, Chicago blurring past the windows like something she was slowly leaving behind. She stayed that first night at Marcus's house, in the room that still had her old posters on the wall from when she was 16, and had slept here for 3 months after her mother died, and the house on Loomis felt too quiet to survive in. She lay on the narrow bed and looked at the ceiling and listened to the rain and did not sleep. Around 2 in the morning, she opened the box with the blue tape and took out her mother's journal. The cover was green cloth, soft from years of handling. The spine had broken at some point and been repaired with a strip of packing tape that had since yellowed. She had read the journal so many times she had sections of it memorized, could hear her mother's voice in the particular rhythm of the sentences. Short, declarative, occasionally surprising. The writing of a woman who chose words the way she chose anything, with care and without waste. She opened it to the last entry. The date was March 4th. Her mother had died on March 9th, 5 days later, from a cerebral aneurysm that gave no warning and took the entire Voss family completely apart. The last entry was 3 sentences. I am tired today. The boys made dinner, and it was wrong in every way and completely correct. I don't know what I would have done without them. Elena had read those 3 sentences so many times that they had become less like words and more like a shape she knew by touch. She ran her thumb across the handwriting and thought about her mother sitting at the kitchen table on Loomis Street, tired, writing 3 sentences before she went to bed, not knowing she was writing the last thing she would ever write. She thought about the child moving beneath her ribs right now, the child who would never meet this woman, and something cracked open in her chest that she did not have a name for. She closed the journal. She set it on the nightstand and lay back down and looked at the ceiling, and somewhere around 3:30 in the morning she heard a sound from downstairs. The particular creak of the 3rd step, which Marcus had never fixed because, as teenagers, they'd used it as an alarm system when someone came home past curfew. She heard it once, and then she heard the low sound of voices, Marcus's and at least 2 of her brothers, measured and quiet in the way they only got when they were talking about something serious. She lay still and listened to the sound of them without hearing the words. This was what she was thinking about when her phone lit up on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. No name attached, just a message. He's already having the papers drawn up. Not divorce. Asset protection. You need to see what he's moving before morning. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she sat up. Elena stared at the text message for 47 seconds. She counted them without meaning to, the way the brain sometimes imposes order on moments that are structurally disordered, something to do with the hands while the rest of the nervous system catches up. He's already having the papers drawn up. Not divorce. Asset protection. You need to see what he's moving before morning. Unknown number. No context. No name. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed in Marcus's spare room with her feet flat on the floor and her mother's journal on the nightstand beside her and the blue-taped box open at her feet, and she read the message 3 more times. Then she screenshot it, for no reason she could articulate except that it felt like the kind of thing that might disappear. She thought about Damien standing in his doorway with his wine glass and his controlled face and his voice that carried so evenly across the rain. Come inside. We can discuss this reasonably. She thought about him reaching into his pocket, seeing her name on his phone screen, and setting it face down on the table. Asset protection. Not divorce. Asset protection. She knew the difference. 4 years of marriage to a man who ran the kind of operation Damien ran meant she had absorbed, against her initial resistance, a working knowledge of how money moved when powerful people wanted it to stop being findable. Asset protection was what you did when you were anticipating a legal claim and you needed the assets to be somewhere else before the claim arrived. It was preemptive. It was deliberate. It meant Damien had been planning this before tonight, before the gate, before the rain, maybe before she told him about the baby. She stood up, moved to the bedroom door, and opened it. The voices downstairs were still going. She walked to the top of the stairs and sat down on the landing, and from there she could hear them clearly enough. Marcus, Joel, Theo. She couldn't hear Daniel, which meant either he'd gone home or he was there and not speaking, which was entirely possible for Daniel. Can't move on a text from an unknown number, Joel was saying. His voice was the flattest of the 4 brothers, The one that sounded most like he was reading from a document, even when he was engaged in something completely unscripted. "We need a source." "We have a source," Marcus said. "We have speculation and a number that doesn't trace. We have 4 years of watching this man operate, and a sister who is 8 months pregnant and standing in the rain at 11:30 at night. I'm not waiting for I'm not saying wait. I'm saying don't move blind." A pause. The sound of something being set down on the kitchen table, a mug, maybe, or a phone. "He's moving money," Theo said. He said it the way 29-year-olds said things they'd just figured out and couldn't yet keep the urgency out of. "He's moving it tonight. If we don't—" "Theo," Joel again, same flat tone. "Sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want to—" "Sit down." Silence. Then the sound of a chair. Marcus said, "Here's what we know. He had the access card disabled before she got there. He knew she was coming. The boxes were already packed. This was not Damian Cross having a dinner party that ran long. This was Damian Cross executing something he'd been planning for a minimum of several weeks." "Longer?" said a voice Elena hadn't heard yet. "Daniel. So he was there. Just quiet. The filing I pulled. The one Reeves flagged 6 days ago. That's not something you set up in several weeks. That's something you set up over months." Elena's spine went straight. She had not known about any filing. She had not known Marcus had been in contact with anyone named Reeves. She sat on the top step with her back against the wall and the cold of the floor coming up through her socks, and she kept very still. "How many months?" Marcus said. "The earliest entity was registered 14 months ago," Daniel said. "A holding company in Delaware. Nominee directors, no traceable ownership, but the address on the registered agent matches a property management company Damian Cross used for 3 commercial buildings he sold in 2021. It's thin, but it's there." 14 months. Elena did the math without wanting to. 14 months ago, she and Damian had been trying to remember what they had been doing 14 months ago, and what came to her was a Sunday morning in the kitchen on North Burling. Damian reading something on his phone while she made coffee, and her saying something to him about the light coming through the window, something small and unremarkable, and him looking up at her briefly and then back at his phone. She had stored that memory as ordinary. She was now understanding it differently. She stood up and walked downstairs. The 4 of them were at the kitchen table, Marcus at the head, Daniel to his left with the laptop open, Joel with his arms crossed and his chair tilted back slightly, Theo with both elbows on the table and his jaw set at an angle that meant he was working very hard to stay in his chair. They all looked up when she came into the kitchen, and none of them looked surprised to see her, which meant at least some part of them had known she was on the landing. "The filing," she said, looking at Daniel. "Tell me." Daniel looked at Marcus. Marcus gave a slight nod. "Sit down first," Daniel said. "I'm fine standing." "Elena," Marcus said. "Sit down, please." She sat. The chair was hard and the kitchen light was the particular fluorescent brightness of a room people use at 2 in the morning when they're working rather than living in it, and she put her hands flat on the table and looked at her brother. Daniel turned the laptop to face her. It was a document, several pages, dense with legal formatting, the kind of thing that communicates by weight as much as by content. Her eyes moved down the first page, looking for the elements she could understand, and she found them one by one: the name of a Delaware holding company, a date of registration that matched what Daniel had said, and partway down the second page, a name she recognized: Vivian Laurent, listed as a signatory authority. Elena looked at the screen for a long time without speaking. "When was Vivian Laurent given signatory authority on this entity?" she said. 8 months ago, Daniel said. 8 months ago, Elena had been 2 months pregnant. She had not yet told Damian. She had been waiting for what she privately thought of as the right moment, the moment when things between them felt stable enough to absorb the news without cracking. She had been managing her prenatal appointments alone, scheduling them on days she knew Damian would be traveling, telling no one. 8 months ago, while she was doing that, Damian had been giving Vivian Laurent signatory authority on a financial entity he hadn't told his wife existed. "There's more," Daniel said. His voice was careful now, the way a doctor's voice goes careful when they're about to say something that will change the shape of someone's life. The Delaware entity has been used to receive transfers from 3 of Damien's operating accounts over the last 14 months. The total is... He paused, pressed his lips together. It's significant. We're still trying to get the full picture. How significant? Elena said. We think upward of 4 million, possibly more. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the rain was still coming down, lighter now, but steady. He was protecting assets, Elena said. Not a question, just the process of saying it aloud so that it became real in a different way than it had been real in her head. He was building a structure that would make those assets legally invisible if you ever filed a claim against the marriage, Marcus said. A divorce filing, a paternity claim, anything that would give you legal standing against his estate. By the time you file anything, there's nothing to find. Elena looked at the table. There was a ring stain from someone's mug near the corner that had been there since she was a teenager, and she focused on it for a moment because it was something fixed and known in a room that was becoming steadily less familiar. He knew about the baby, she said. What? Theo said. He knew about the baby before I told him, she said. I told him 6 weeks ago, but he started this 14 months ago. So either... She stopped, rearranged the logic. Or he started this for other reasons and the baby just accelerated what he was already doing. Either way, Joel said, the result is the same. No, she said. It's not the same. If he started this before the baby, then he was already planning to remove me from his life before he knew I was pregnant. Which means the pregnancy didn't cause this. It just confirmed to him that he needed to move faster. No one said anything. She stood up. Her back registered the movement with a low, sharp complaint that she ignored. She walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the rain in the alley and the wet surface of the fire escape and the particular lightless dark of Chicago at 3 a.m. The text, she said, without turning around. The one I got upstairs. Unknown number. Someone told me about the asset protection tonight specifically. We saw it, Marcus said. Reeves sent it. Who is Reeves? Another pause. The kind of pause that contains a decision about how much to say. Someone I've had looking into Cross's operation for about 2 months, Marcus said. Quietly. She turned around. 2 months. Yes. You've had someone looking into my husband for 2 months. Yes. She looked at him. He held her gaze without flinching because Marcus had never been able to do the thing where he looked away when he knew he'd done something she wouldn't like, and she had always both hated and loved that about him. He met it straight on and let her react and didn't perform guilt and didn't over-explain, just waited for her to get to the actual substance of the thing. Why didn't you tell me, she said, because you would have asked me to stop. And you didn't want to stop. No, she breathed out through her nose. What else does Reeves know? More than what's in that document, Daniel said. That's a starting point. There are shell companies in 3 states and what looks like a transaction routing structure that runs through at least 2 offshore entities. It's going to take time to map it fully. But it's real, she said, not speculation. It's real, Daniel said. She nodded slowly. She moved back to the table but didn't sit down, just stood with her hands on the back of the chair. What does Damien do when he finds out you've been looking? He's not going to find out, Theo said, with the certainty of 29. He's going to find out, Elena said. He always finds out. That's how he operates. He builds systems that tell him things before people think he knows them. She looked at Marcus. When he finds out that you've been running a financial investigation on him, he's not going to send a letter. You know that. I know that, Marcus said, and you're doing it anyway. Yes. She stood there with her hands on the back of the chair and looked at her oldest brother. 41 years old, wide-shouldered, the man who had stood outside her school when she was 7 and waited for the kid who'd split her lip to come out, who had taught her to drive in an empty parking lot in Bridgeport when she was 15, who had sat with her for 3 days straight after their mother died, and never once told her to stop crying or that it was going to be fine. And she felt something move through her chest that was not quite gratitude and not quite grief, but lived in the neighborhood of both. Okay, she said. Okay, Marcus said. She sat down. They worked until 5:30 in the morning. Daniel walked her through the document structure, explaining each layer as he understood it, flagging the parts that were still unclear. Joel made coffee that was bad, but very strong, and nobody complained. Theo fell asleep in his chair sometime around 4:15, and Joel put a jacket over him without any visible change of expression. Elena asked questions, most of them useful, some of them that opened up new lines in the document she hadn't noticed, and by the time the kitchen windows were beginning to lighten, she understood the basic architecture of what Damien had built. It was elegant, in the way that things built by intelligent people to accomplish dishonest purposes often are. The Delaware Holding Company was the entry point. From there, funds moved through a series of licensed financial entities, 2 in Nevada, 1 in Wyoming, before reaching accounts held by nominees in what appeared to be overseas structures. The movement was slow enough to avoid triggering standard monitoring thresholds and fast enough to be effectively complete before any legal proceeding could establish a claim date. It had been designed by someone who understood exactly how discovery worked in a divorce proceeding and had built a structure specifically to be 3 steps ahead of it. Vivienne Laurent, Elena said at one point. She said it without any particular emotion, just the name, flat. She's a financial advisor, Daniel said. High-end, primarily private clients. Cross has been her client for years, before you. I know that, Elena said. I mean her role in this specifically. She's not just a signatory. You don't give someone signature authority over a structure like this because you need the paperwork signed. You give it to them because they built the structure. Daniel looked at Marcus. That's what Reeves thinks, Marcus said. Vivienne Laurent didn't walk into Damien Cross's life and take your place socially. She walked into his financial operation and gave him a way to make everything disappear. Elena nodded. And the social piece? The dinners? The appearances? Cover, Joel said from his position against the counter. Or maybe not. Maybe both. But the financial piece came first. She absorbed that. She thought about Vivienne Laurent sitting across the candlelit table on North Burling Street, and the particular angle at which the light had made everything look like a composition rather than a dinner. And she thought about Damien's real smile, the one he almost never used, appearing in that window while Elena stood at the gate in the rain. She thought, I don't actually know if he loves her, or if she's useful, or if at this point there's a difference to him. And she thought, it doesn't matter. What I need, she said, is documentation. Not for Marcus's purposes, for mine. For the baby's. She pressed one hand briefly to her side. Whatever he's moved, whatever he's hidden, if I'm going to protect this child's legal interests, I need documentation of the structure before it gets any more obscured. We're already pulling it, Daniel said. I know. I'm saying that's my priority. Not Damien's empire, not whatever Marcus wants to do with the information. My child's interests. That's what I need the documentation for. She looked at Marcus directly when she said it. He looked back at her, and she knew he understood that she was drawing a line, clearly and in advance, about what the information was going to be used for. And she knew that he respected the line even if he had his own intentions that ran parallel to it, because that was the particular complexity of having 4 brothers who would do anything for you. It meant negotiating constantly about what anything was actually permitted to mean. Understood, he said. She left the kitchen at 6 and went back upstairs. She did not sleep. She lay on the Narrows bed and listened to the sound of the city waking up. The first garbage truck of the morning on Halsted, a dog somewhere, the particular urban accumulation of sound that marks the shift from night to day, and she thought about what came next. At 7:15 her phone rang. Not a text. A call. Unknown number. Different from the one that had sent the message, but unknown in the same way, the same absence of identifying information. She answered it. Mrs. Cross. A man's voice. Not young, not a voice she recognized. I'm not using that name, she said. Who is this? Someone who works for your husband, the voice said. Or worked. Past tense, as of approximately 3 hours ago. She sat up. What happened 3 hours ago? I was let go, along with 7 other people who had, let's say, close working relationships with you over the years. Your preferred drivers, your household staff contacts, the assistant who managed your personal calendar. She knew who he meant. She thought about Paula, her personal assistant for the last 2 years, a woman of 53 who had worked for Damien's household for a decade before Elena arrived, and had navigated the transition with a kind of steady competence that Elena had come to rely on completely. She thought about Rodrigo, who had been driving her to and from Northwestern on nights when Damien's vehicles were in use, who always had the seat at the right height and never asked questions. Fired. All of them. "Why are you calling me?" she said. "Because I had your personal cell from managing certain logistics, and because what happened tonight is not something I'm willing to be on the right side of." A pause. "And because there's something you don't know yet. Something that changes the shape of everything you think you know about the last 4 years." Her hand tightened on the phone. "Say it. Not on an open line. I need to meet with you. Somewhere your husband's people are not." "I don't know who your husband's people are," she said. "No," the voice said. "That's exactly the problem." The call ended. Elena sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in her lap, and the morning light coming through the curtains, and the sound of Marcus moving around downstairs, and the baby turning once, slowly, in the deep interior dark of her, as if adjusting position in anticipation of whatever came next. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed this with a kind of distant clinical attention. The same detachment she brought to difficult moments in the ER. The part of her training that had taught her that the mind's job during a crisis is to stay functional, that the shaking happens after, when it's safe. She had never quite figured out whether that was healthy or whether she'd simply spent enough years in emergency rooms that she'd trained herself out of normal human responses to threat. She stood up, put her feet in her shoes, pulled her hair back with the band on her wrist. She picked up her mother's journal from the nightstand and held it for a moment, the familiar weight, the soft, broken spine, and then she set it back down. She walked to the door and opened it and called down the stairs. "Marcus?" He appeared at the bottom of the stairs immediately, which meant he'd been close, which meant he'd been listening, which was Marcus. "I need you to find out if Paula Reyes and Rodrigo Salinas were let go from the Cross household in the last 3 hours," she said. His expression didn't change, but something moved behind his eyes. "Why?" "Because someone just called me and told me they were. Someone who was also let go. Someone who says there's something I don't know about the last 4 years." A silence. "Did they say what?" Marcus said. "They want to meet. In person. Somewhere Damien's people won't be." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and said, "Into the kitchen." "Joel." Joel appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Cross purged his household staff sometime before 6 this morning," Marcus said. "Find out who, how many, and where they are." Joel disappeared back into the kitchen without a word. Marcus looked up at Elena. "Come down," he said. "Have something to eat." "I'm not hungry." "Come down anyway." She came down. She sat at the kitchen table and drank the bad strong coffee while Joel worked and Daniel slept in his chair, and Theo woke up and immediately started asking questions that nobody answered, and the morning solidified around them, ordinary and wrong in equal measure. At 8:47, Joel set his phone on the table. "Paula Reyes was called at 5:15 this morning," he said. "Severance offered. Her personal items from the house are being couriered to her home address today. Rodrigo Salinas, same, 5:20. 4 other household staff members, same window. 6 people," Marcus said. 7, including the man who called Elena. "Who was he?" "His name is Arthur Beam. He managed Damien Cross's private scheduling for 11 years. The kitchen went quiet. 11 years. Arthur Beam had been with Damien Cross for 11 years, which meant he had been there before Vivian and Laurent, before Elena, before whatever the structure in the Delaware holding company represented. If Arthur Beam said there was something Elena didn't know about the last 4 years, he was not saying it as someone with a partial view of the operation. He was saying it as someone who had seen everything. "I need to meet with him," Elena said. "Not alone," Marcus said. "Obviously not alone. And not anywhere Cross has eyes." "I know," she said. "Can you find somewhere?" Marcus looked at Joel. Joel looked at the ceiling briefly, which was how he thought. Then he said, "Pilsen, the place Daniel uses for consults. It's clean." "Set it up," Marcus said. Joel reached for his phone. Elena wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and felt the warmth of it move through her palms, and she sat in her brother's kitchen at 8:49 in the morning and thought about 11 years and $4 million, and a woman whose name appeared on documents that should have had Elena's name on them, or no one's name, And she thought about a man she had chosen when she didn't have to choose him, had chosen him specifically because she saw past what he was to what he could be, and what she was beginning to understand now. Slowly, the way you understand things that restructure your entire recent past was that Damien Cross had seen her seeing that and had used it, and the question she could not yet answer, the question that would determine everything about what came next, was whether he had known he was using it from the beginning or whether it had happened gradually, the erosion of a person who started out genuine and became, over time, something else entirely. She didn't know which answer was worse. She was still sitting with that when her phone lit up on the table, and the name on the screen was not unknown this time. It was Damien. Elena stared at Damien's name on the screen and did not move for 3 full seconds. The kitchen had gone still. Marcus was watching her. Joel had stopped typing. Theo, who had been pouring himself coffee with the particular focused effort of someone still half asleep, set the mug down without finishing. She picked up the phone and answered it. Elena. His voice was the same as it always was, measured, controlled, the kind of voice that had been trained, consciously or not, to communicate authority through its absence of urgency. We should talk. We're talking, she said, not like this, in person. I don't think that's a good idea right now. A pause. Not long. Damien Cross did not do long pauses. He considered them a form of weakness, had said so once at a dinner she'd attended with him, offhandedly, in a way that told her it was something he actually believed rather than performed. I heard about Arthur Beam, he said. Her hand tightened on the phone. Across the table, Marcus read her face, and his jaw shifted. You heard about it in the last... She looked at the clock on the microwave. 90 minutes? I'm told he contacted you. Who told you? That's not the relevant question. It's relevant to me, she said. Someone in your organization is monitoring Arthur Beam's calls at 5 in the morning, which means either you had him under surveillance before you fired him, or someone in your organization moved very fast to set that up, and I want to know which one. Silence. Longer this time. She had said something he hadn't expected her to say, and she felt the specific satisfaction of that. Small and cold, not warm enough to be called pleasure, but real enough to note. Come to the house, he said. Let's sit down and... I don't have access to the house, she said. You disabled my card. I'll have it restored. That's not the point, Damien. Then what is the point, Elena? The control in his voice developed a faint hairline fracture. Not anger, not exactly, but the place where the architecture of controlled presentation begins to show the stress of what it's containing. What do you want me to do right now? Tell me specifically what you want. She looked at the table. She thought about Arthur Beam and his voice and the thing he'd said. There's something you don't know about the last 4 years. She thought about Vivian Laurent's name on a document dated 8 months ago. She thought about the rain. Nothing, she said. I don't want anything from you right now. Don't call this number again. She ended the call. She set the phone face down on the table. Her hands were steady. The baby moved, a long, slow push against her lower right side, the kind of movement that was becoming more constrained as the space ran out, the particular compression of the last weeks of pregnancy where the child seemed to be testing the limits of available territory. He knows about Beam, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Which means he knows Beam has something. Or he knows Beam thinks he has something, and he's concerned about what Beam will say regardless of whether it's provable. She picked up her coffee. Either way, it means we need to move the meeting up. Joel, Marcus said. Already on it, Joel said, and picked up his phone. They met Arthur Beam at 9:45 in a second-floor office space above a framing shop on West 21st Street in Pilsen. A room with 2 windows facing the alley, a folding table, and 4 chairs that didn't match. Daniel had swept it for anything listening adjacent before they arrived, a process he performed with the systematic attention he brought to everything and explained to no one. Beam was already there when they came in, standing near the far window with his hands in the pockets of a gray overcoat that had seen considerable use. He was 61, maybe 63, medium height, with the particular compaction of a man who had spent decades making himself unobtrusive in rooms full of people who didn't want to acknowledge his presence. He had gray hair cut short and eyes that moved with careful attention when Elena and Marcus came through the door, logging details with the practiced speed of someone who has spent years managing information as a matter of professional survival. He looked at Elena's belly briefly, then looked away. Whatever he felt about what he was seeing, he kept it professional. "Mrs. he started. "Voss?" she said. "Elena Voss?" He nodded. "Ms. Voss." He looked at Marcus. "I'd prefer to speak with her alone." "That's not happening," Marcus said. "I thought you might say that." Beam looked back at Elena. "He can stay. The others wait outside." Elena glanced at Marcus. Marcus looked at Beam for a moment with the measuring expression he used when he was deciding whether something was a reasonable request or a positioning move. Then he looked at Joel and Theo and tilted his head toward the door. They went without argument, though Theo's jaw made his feelings about it clear. The three of them, Elena, Marcus, Beam, sat down at the folding table. Beam folded his hands on its surface. He had the demeanor of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to say enough times to have removed the shaking from it without removing the weight. "I need to know what you already know," he said to Elena, "before I tell you what I know. I need to understand what your brothers have been building, because what I have either confirms it or complicates it, and I need to understand which." 14 months, Elena said. "Delaware Holding Company, asset protection structure running through Nevada and Wyoming entities. Vivienne Laurent as signatory authority." Beam absorbed this. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but the specific adjustment of someone who had expected to be the only person in the room with a complete picture and has just discovered the picture is further along than anticipated. "Your brothers are thorough," he said. "Yes," Marcus said. "What they found is accurate," Beam said, "but it's the surface layer." Elena looked at him. "Say what you mean." "The Delaware structure," Beam said, "is not primarily asset protection." He paused, choosing the next words with the deliberateness of a man who has spent 11 years choosing words for a man who punished imprecision. "It's a mechanism for moving money that doesn't belong to Damien Cross." The room was very quiet. "Whose money?" Elena said. "People your husband does business with," Beam said. "The kind of business that generates significant cash that cannot be declared. The Delaware structure and its subsidiaries are not protecting Damien's assets from you. They are laundering money for 3 separate organizations, 2 of which operate primarily in the Midwest, and 1 of which has significant federal law enforcement attention on it right now." Elena heard Marcus exhale slowly beside her. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Beam. "For how long?" she said. "The laundering operation, in its current form, 14 months. But the relationship between Damien Cross and these organizations predates that, significantly." "How significantly?" Beam looked at the table, then back at her. "Ms. Voss, I need to ask you something before I continue. When you met Damien in that hospital emergency room, November, 3 years and 7 months ago, do you know how he came to be there that night?" The question landed in an odd place. She had never thought deeply about how Damien had come to be in her emergency room that Thursday night in November. She had assumed it was the obvious explanation. He'd been injured in connection with his work. His associates had brought him to the nearest appropriate facility, routine. "He was injured," she said. "His people brought him in." "He was injured," Beam confirmed. "He was injured in a meeting that went badly with a representative of one of the organizations I'm referring to. The meeting was about the structure of a partnership that those organizations wanted Damien to provide, specifically the financial infrastructure, the ability to move money through legitimate adjacent channels. Damien was resistant. The injury was a form of persuasion. Something cold moved through her. By the time he came to your hospital, Beam said, he had not yet agreed to the partnership. He was still in a period of negotiation. He used the word carefully. He met you. You treated him. He came back. Another pause. And then the negotiation concluded. She stared at him. What are you saying? I'm saying that in the months following his first contact with you, Damien Cross agreed to terms he had previously been refusing. I managed his schedule. I saw who he met with and when. The timeline is not ambiguous. You're saying she was the reason, Marcus said. His voice was flat in a way that meant the opposite of calm. I'm saying that Damien Cross met a woman who made him want something he hadn't wanted before. Stability, respectability, a life that looked like something other than what it was. And that wanting that thing changed his calculus about what he was willing to agree to, because agreeing meant resources, and resources meant he could build the kind of life that might... Beam stopped. I'm speculating about his interior states. I shouldn't. Keep speculating, Elena said, and her voice came out very even, which surprised her. Beam looked at her directly. I think he chose you and chose the partnership at the same time. I don't think you were part of the calculation, but I think the calculation happened around you. The silence in the room had a texture to it now, dense and cold. Elena sat with what she had just been told and let it reorganize itself in her mind. The hospital, the 2 visits, then the dinners, the way he'd looked at her across the table and said, I've never done this before. The years of marriage, the good parts, the real parts, the parts she had held on to through the absences and the secret meetings and the unexplained injuries, and underneath all of it, underneath everything she had thought she was choosing and being chosen for, there was this. A man who had entered her life during the period when he was deciding to do something that would compromise everything he was and everything around him, and who had used the stability of what she represented to make that decision bearable to himself. She had not been the reason he chose the partnership, but she might have been the reason he stopped fighting it. The federal attention, Marcus said. His voice had gone to the flat-focused register he used when he was working. You said one of these organizations has significant federal attention on it right now. How current? Within the last 6 weeks, Beam said. There's a grand jury. I don't know its precise scope. What I know is that Damien knows about it, and that the asset protection structure was accelerated specifically in response to it. He's not protecting assets from Elena, Marcus said slowly. He's protecting assets from a federal forfeiture proceeding. Yes, Beam said. And from any associated investigation that might extend to people within his household, including his wife. Elena felt the full structure of it lock into place. The disabled access card, the packed boxes. Paula Reyes and Rodrigo Salinas fired at 5 in the morning. The document granting Vivienne Laurent authority over the financial structure. Damien Cross was not discarding his wife because he had chosen another woman. He was removing his wife from his life because he was about to be investigated by a federal grand jury, and a wife with legal standing in his estate was a liability he could not afford. He was cutting her loose specifically so that she could not be compelled, deposed, or named, so that what he was doing could not be reached through her. He was protecting the operation by removing her from proximity to it. And somewhere in that calculation, she did not know where, did not know if it mattered, there might have been something that looked like protection of her. A man trying, in his way, to ensure that the woman carrying his child was not in the blast radius when the structure came apart. She did not know if that made it better or worse. She suspected it made it something else entirely, a third category she didn't have a word for yet. The document, she said, the one giving Vivienne Laurent signatory authority. If there's a federal investigation into the organizations using Damien's structure to launder money, then Vivienne Laurent is also exposed, Beam said. Yes. Does she know? Beam looked at her with something that might have been, in different circumstances, sympathy. Ms. Voss, Vivienne Laurent built the structure. She knows exactly what it is and exactly what the exposure is. Another pause. She also knows that her name appears on documents that will be discoverable if there's ever a formal proceeding, which means her interests and Damien's interests are not entirely aligned right now. They're each protecting themselves, Marcus said. Using each other's resources to do it, Beam said. Elena stood up. She moved to the window and looked down at the alley. Wet pavement, a dumpster, a cat moving along the base of the opposite building with the focused purposefulness of animals who don't perform their intentions for anyone. She put one hand against the wall beside the window frame and breathed. She had built a marriage on what she believed she saw in a man. She had looked past the obvious and found what she thought was the actual. She had been, professionally and personally, someone who understood the difference between presentation and condition. And what she was now understanding was that the condition she had seen in Damien Cross, the genuine aloneness, the person behind the power, was real. She had not been wrong about that. But real did not mean clean. Real did not mean safe. Real did not mean that a person who was genuinely lonely and genuinely drawn to her was incapable of simultaneously building structures around that connection that used it for purposes she hadn't consented to and didn't know about. Both things were true at the same time, and that was the thing that was hard to hold. She turned back from the window. Arthur, the grand jury, what's the timeline? I don't know precisely, but the acceleration of the asset movement suggests Damien believes it's imminent. And if his name comes up in a federal proceeding, she said, and I am his legal wife. You become a person of interest in any associated civil proceeding. Your finances, your accounts, any joint holdings. They look at everything. He paused. Even if you had no knowledge, the process doesn't distinguish initially. She looked at Marcus. His face was doing something she recognized. The expression of a man working through a problem that has just become significantly more complicated than it was 30 seconds ago. He was protecting the operation, Marcus said, but he was also functionally protecting me, Elena said, from something I didn't know I needed protecting from. The words felt ugly in her mouth. Not because they weren't true, but because of what was attached to them. The idea that Damien Cross, in the act of removing her from his life in the most brutal available manner, had also been trying to ensure that the blast from his choices didn't reach her. That his way of caring about her at the end looked indistinguishable from abandonment. That doesn't make it right, Theo said from the doorway. He had come back in. Not all the way, just inside the doorframe. Nobody told him to leave again. No, Elena said. It doesn't. Yabim reached into the inside pocket of his overcoat and removed a folded envelope. He set it on the table. 11 years, he said. I have kept records. Not because I intended to use them, because that's the kind of person I am. I document things. I have always documented things. He looked at the envelope, then at Elena. In that envelope is a summary of everything I can corroborate about the structure, the timeline, the organizations, and Damien's role. It is not complete, but it is a start, and it is yours to use as you see fit. Elena looked at the envelope. She did not pick it up immediately. Why? She said. You worked for him for 11 years. Why give this to me? Beam was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table, at the envelope, at Elena's hands. Because he fired Paula Reyes at 5 a.m, he said finally. Paula has worked for that household for 11 years. She has a daughter in high school, and she has never done a single thing that wasn't professional and correct and loyal. And he fired her via phone call at 5 a.m. with a severance offer that doesn't account for 11 years of service because she knew your routines and your preferences and your schedule, and that made her a liability. He paused. I decided I didn't want to work for that anymore. Elena picked up the envelope. She held it for a moment, the weight of it, not heavy, a few folded pages, and thought about how much could be contained in a few folded pages when the person who assembled them had spent 11 years paying attention to the right things. What are you going to do now? She asked. I have family in Columbus, Beam said. I'm going to go be there for a while. She nodded. She wanted to say something more than that, something that acknowledged what he'd just done and what it cost him and what it meant. But she had learned in emergency rooms that sometimes the most honest thing was the most minimal thing, and so she said, Thank you. He stood up, buttoned his overcoat, and left without another word. The three of them, Elena, Marcus, Theo in the doorway, sat with the silence for a moment. Then Joel appeared behind Theo and said, from the hallway, We have a problem. Marcus looked at him. What? 2 of Cross's vehicles have been on this block since before we arrived, Joel said. One of them moved in the last 5 minutes. It's now parked directly outside. The room went cold. Elena looked at Marcus. He followed Beam. Or he followed the call trace from Beam's phone, Marcus said, already standing. Either way, we need to move. He was already looking at the envelope in Elena's hands. Put that inside your jacket, against your body. Don't put it in a bag. She did it without discussion, tucking the folded envelope inside the waistband of her pants and pulling her shirt over it. She was 8 months pregnant and the envelope was flat against the side of her body, and when she straightened up, She looked entirely unremarkable. "Backstairs," Joel said. "There's an exit into the alley on the east side." They moved. The backstairs were narrow and wooden and complained with every step, and Elena kept one hand on the rail and moved as fast as she could, which was not fast, which was the particular frustrated helplessness of a body that had its own requirements regardless of urgency. Marcus stayed behind her without crowding her, his presence on the step above her a physical fact rather than a gesture. They came out into the alley. The cat was gone. The wet pavement reflected the white, overcast sky. Joel moved to the corner of the alley and looked, pulled back, held up two fingers. Two people visible from the alley entrance on the east side. "West," he said, and they went west. They were 3/4 of the way down the alley when a door opened ahead of them. The rear exit of a restaurant, propped open, a cook in an apron stepping out with a trash bag, startling visibly when he found 4 people moving fast through his alley. He stepped aside without a word. Elena met his eyes briefly as she passed, and he looked at her belly and looked away. They came out on South Racine. Marcus's Suburban was parked on 21st, which was the wrong direction. Daniel's truck was on Racine, half a block north, and Daniel materialized from beside a parked van as they came around the corner. "I was monitoring the street," he said, which meant he had been sitting in the truck watching. "Cross's people are on 21st, Joel said. "How many vehicles you see come in?" "2 when we arrived. Third one came in about 8 minutes ago and parked behind the first. Driver stayed in." "3 vehicles," Marcus said. Elena looked at the envelope against her side. 3 vehicles. Which meant this was not casual surveillance of a fired employee's movements. This was a coordinated effort. Damian Cross had known about this meeting. Not the specific address, maybe, but enough to have 3 vehicles in a 2-block radius of a neighborhood his recently fired scheduler had contacted his wife to arrange a meeting in. "How?" she said. Nobody answered immediately. Then Theo said, very quietly, "How did he know where to send 3 vehicles?" Joel looked at Daniel, a quick, communicative look that Elena caught. "What?" she said. Another pause. The bad kind. The kind where the pause is longer than the information it contains, because the information is the kind that requires a moment of decision about how to say it. "When Reeves sent you the initial text last night," Daniel said, "the one about the asset protection, we had Reeves use a routing protocol that would make the message unattributable to him specifically." "Yes," Elena said. "You told me." "What we didn't anticipate," Daniel said, "is that Cross has someone monitoring the cell traffic coming into your personal number. Not the content, just the pattern. When an unknown number contacts your phone at 3 in the morning, and then a second unknown number contacts your phone at 7, and then you leave Marcus's house and go to a specific address in Pilsen. He didn't need to know the address," Marcus said slowly. "He just needed to know the neighborhood." "And then run a fast cross-reference of properties connected to anyone Marcus Voss has done business with in the last 2 years, Daniel said. "The framing shop on 21st is owned by someone Daniel used as a reference for a contracting permit in 2023. The fullness of it arrived in Elena like cold water. Not a wave, not sudden, but a rising that reached every part of the available space. Damian Cross had not followed Beam. He had not followed Elena. He had built a surveillance net around her phone activity and her brother's known associates and had reverse-engineered their location from the pattern of their precautions. He had used their own careful planning to find them. 11 years of building systems that told him things before people thought he knew them. She had said exactly that to Marcus last night. She had warned them. "Get in the truck," Marcus said. They got in. Daniel drove. Marcus was in the passenger seat. Elena was in the back between Joel and Theo, and as they pulled away from the curb onto South Racine and headed north, she watched the side mirror and saw a dark sedan emerge from 21st Street and move to follow them at a distance that was just far enough to be technically deniable. "He's behind us," she said. "I know," Daniel said. "What do we do?" "We go somewhere he already knows," Marcus said. "We go back to Bridgeport, back to my house. We give him nothing new to work with. And then we think." She turned from the mirror. She looked at her hands in her lap. The envelope was still there, flat against her side, and she pressed one hand to it through her shirt and felt the slight stiffness of the paper. She thought about what Beam had said about the grand jury. Imminent. Which meant days, possibly, a week or two at the outside. She thought about Vivienne Laurent and the fact that Vivienne's interests and Damien's interests were no longer fully aligned. Two people sharing a compromised structure, each with their own exposure, each with their own calculation about how to manage it. She thought about $4 million and 3 organizations and 14 months of money moving through channels that were about to have federal light shone on them. And she thought, there is a moment in every situation like this where the people involved stop managing their relationships with each other and start managing their relationships with the proceeding. Where the question is no longer what do we owe each other, but what do we tell them first? She had not wanted to be in this situation. She had not signed up for this, had not agreed to any of it, had not been consulted or informed or given the option to choose differently. But she was here, 8 months pregnant, in the back of her brother's truck, with a surveillance vehicle 3 cars behind them and a folded envelope against her skin containing 11 years of a man's careful documentation. She was not going to wait for the proceeding to reach her. She was not going to sit in her brother's house and be the person things happened to. "Marcus," she said. "Yeah. I need a lawyer, not a family lawyer, a federal defense attorney, the kind who does this specifically." A silence. Then, "I know someone." "Can you get them on the phone today?" "Yes." "Do it," she said. He reached for his phone. The sedan behind them stayed with them all the way to Halstead, then fell back and disappeared, which did not mean it was gone, only that it had decided it had seen enough for now, had confirmed what it needed to confirm. And Elena rode the rest of the way to Bridgeport with the envelope against her body and the baby pressing against her from the inside, and the specific sensation of someone who has just made a decision that cannot be unmade. The sensation of a door closing cleanly behind you as you walk into a room you have never been in before and cannot yet see the full dimensions of. The truck pulled onto Marcus's street and she saw the light in the front window. Daniel must have left it on when they left this morning. And something about that ordinary amber light in the gray morning made her throat tighten briefly before she controlled it. Marcus was on the phone. She could hear him in the front seat saying a name and an address, and the words "today if possible." "It's urgent." And she closed her eyes for a moment and pressed her palm flat against the envelope and thought, whatever Damien Cross has built, whatever he's protected, whatever he planned, the one thing he didn't account for was the 11 years Arthur Beam spent writing everything down. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Not Damien this time. A number she recognized. One of the numbers from Damien's internal office system, the kind used by his senior staff. She had seen it appear on his phone dozens of times in the years they'd been together. She answered it. Silence on the line. Then a woman's voice, low, precise, carrying the particular quality of someone accustomed to speaking in rooms where being overheard is a professional hazard. Vivienne Laurent said, "We need to meet, without your brothers, without Damien, just the 2 of us." She paused, then added something that made Elena's entire understanding of the situation shift sideways for the second time in one morning. "Because the documents your brothers found," Vivienne said, "are not the ones that matter. The ones that matter have your name on them. And if you don't hear what I have to tell you before the federal filing lands, you will spend the next 3 years trying to prove you didn't know what your husband put you on." Elena held the phone against her ear and did not breathe for a full 4 seconds. "Documents with my name on them," she said. "Yes," Vivienne said. "What documents?" "Not on the phone." "Tell me what documents, Vivienne." A pause, short, considered. The pause of someone deciding how much to release as proof of concept. "Signature pages," Vivienne said, "on 3 of the subsidiary entities. Your name appears as a beneficial owner on structures that were used to receive transfers from organizations currently under federal scrutiny. The signatures are dated 14 months ago." "I never signed anything." "I know that." The truck had stopped. They were in Marcus's driveway and everyone was looking at her. Marcus half turned from the front seat, Daniel watching the mirror, Joel and Theo on either side of her reading her face. She held up one finger. 1 minute. "If you know that," Elena said, "then you know whose signatures those actually are." "Yes," Vivian said again, the same flat precision. I do. And you're telling me this because Damien decided 2 weeks ago that if the federal filing lands, those documents become the first line of his defense. Someone signed for beneficial ownership in those entities. That person absorbs a significant portion of the initial exposure, while Damien's attorneys argue his direct involvement was administrative rather than material. Another pause. He needed a name on those pages that wasn't his and wasn't mine. Elena's left hand was pressed flat against the seat beside her. She could feel the fabric under her palm. She focused on that. He forged my signature, she said. Yes. On documents that make me a beneficial owner of entities being used to launder money for organizations under federal investigation. Yes. And the federal filing is, my understanding is within 72 hours, possibly less. When it lands, discovery will include those documents. Your name will be in the initial filing. Before anyone has a chance to examine the signatures closely, before your attorneys can respond, your name is in a federal court document as a beneficial owner of those entities. Vivian's voice was precise and uninflected, the voice of someone delivering technical information, but underneath it, very faint, the way heat shows under certain kinds of paint, there was something else. And Damien's legal team will not be in a hurry to correct the record. The truck was silent. Elena was aware peripherally that Marcus had understood enough from hearing her half of the conversation to have gone completely still in the way that meant he was at maximum internal temperature. Why are you telling me this? Elena said. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then, because I built that structure. I know every layer of it, and I did not build it to have a pregnant woman's forged name used as a firebreak for a man who made his own choices. A pause. That was not the agreement. What was the agreement? Meet me, Vivian said. 60 minutes. I'll send you an address. I'm not coming alone. I know. Bring one brother, the one who doesn't talk much. The line went dead. Elena lowered the phone. She looked at Marcus, who looked back at her with the focused intensity of a man who has been waiting for exactly this moment and is still not glad it arrived. Tell me, he said. She told him. All of it. In the flat, sequential way she'd learned from years of emergency room handoffs. This, then this, then this, no editorializing, no anticipating the listener's reaction, just the information in order. She watched his face as she talked. He was almost entirely still. When she finished, the silence in the truck lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Marcus said, "He forged your signature on federal documents." "Yes." "Joel," Marcus said without turning from Elena. "Already pulling what I can on the subsidiary entities," Joel said from the back seat, phone in his hand, thumbs moving. "Give me 20. You have 15. Marcus. Elena put her hand on his arm. He looked at her. "I'm going to meet her." "No." "Yes. She has the documents. She built the structure. If she's willing to sit across from me and tell me what she knows and provide documentation of the forged signatures, that is the single most important thing I can do in the next 72 hours. More important than the lawyer, more important than Beam's envelope, more important than anything your contact Reeves has pulled. Because without proof that those signatures are forged, I am in a federal filing as a beneficial owner of a money laundering structure, and the only person whose story that helps is Damien's." Marcus looked at her. The muscle along his jaw worked once. "Joel goes with you," he said. She had expected the argument to take longer. The fact that it didn't told her that Marcus had done the same math she had and arrived at the same answer. "Joel," she said. "Yeah," Joel said without looking up from his phone. "Can you look harmless for an hour?" "No," Joel said. They drove to the address Vivian sent, a hotel bar in the West Loop, the kind of place designed around the concept of discretion, low light, and high-backed booths, and a sound level calibrated to make eavesdropping structurally impractical. Elena and Joel arrived 8 minutes before Vivian, which Joel had insisted on because arriving after meant your sightlines were already established by the other party. They took a booth near the back that could see both entrances and sat down. Joel ordered coffee. Elena ordered water. Neither of them spoke. Vivian Laurent arrived at 11:17. She was wearing a dark coat over a gray suit, and she moved through the bar with the particular quality of someone so accustomed to being looked at that she had learned to be invisible inside it, controlling her pace and her gaze to avoid the eye contact that triggers recognition. She was 45 or 47, with sharp cheekbones and the kind of contained posture that comes not from rigidity, but from deliberate management of space. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman who understood how money moved and had spent 20 years being paid extremely well for that understanding. She sat across from Elena. She looked at Joel once, briefly, and then did not look at him again, which struck Elena as either very confident or very strategic or both. She put a leather portfolio on the table. She did not open it. "You look like you haven't slept," Vivian said. "I haven't," Elena said. "Talk." Vivian looked at her for a moment with an expression that was entirely unreadable, not blank. Elena had learned to distinguish between blankness and control, but actively managed. The face of someone who has decided what to show and is showing only that. "How much do you know about Damien's relationship with the Caruso organization?" Vivian said. Elena knew the name. Anyone who had spent 4 years married to Damien Cross and paid any attention to the shape of his world knew the Caruso name, a Midwest operation that ran across Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin, with roots in legitimate construction and distribution businesses, and a secondary structure that had been the subject of law enforcement interest for the better part of a decade without producing a successful prosecution. "Enough," Elena said. "He's been their primary financial infrastructure for 14 months, Vivian said. "That's the core of the structure I built. But there are 2 additional organizations. One is smaller, regional, Chicago-based, primarily cash-intensive retail and service businesses that need volume laundering. The third—" She paused. "The third is the problem." "Why?" "Because the third organization is the one the federal grand jury is actually convened about. Not Caruso. Not the regional operation. The third one." She looked at the portfolio. "They move a specific category of product that attracts a different level of federal attention than cash, and Damien's structure was used to facilitate payment processing for several of their transactions." The bar noise continued around them. The low murmur of mid-morning business conversations, the sound of ice in glasses, the particular ambient texture of a room full of people carefully not listening to each other. Elena said, "He didn't tell you what the third organization moved." "He told me they were a high-value commodities broker with regulatory complexity," Vivian said. "That was what he told me. And I—" For the first time, something in her voice changed, a slight roughness, quickly controlled. "I didn't push on the specifics. I should have. I didn't." Joel spoke for the first time. "When did you find out what they actually were?" Vivian looked at him. 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, the same timeline as everything else. Elena felt the convergence of it. 6 weeks ago, she had told Damien about the baby. 6 weeks ago, Vivian had discovered what the third organization actually was. 6 weeks ago, the asset structure had begun accelerating. 6 weeks ago, multiple things had happened simultaneously that had reorganized everything. "He knew you'd found out," Elena said, "about the third organization." "Yes," Vivian said, "which is when he began the process of restructuring the signature authorities, and when he added your name to the beneficial ownership pages." She reached to the portfolio and opened it. She removed a set of documents, copies, Elena noted, not originals, but clean copies, and placed them on the table. Elena looked at the top page. It was a beneficial ownership declaration for one of the Wyoming entities Daniel had identified. Near the bottom, above a signature line, was her name, Elena Marie Cross. And beneath it, a signature. Her name. Not her signature. She had signed her name 10,000 times in her adult life, nursing documentation, hospital forms, personal correspondence, and she knew the particular way her hand made the letters, the slight leftward lean on the E, the way the loop of the L extended slightly higher than convention suggested. The signature on this page was close. It was very close. But the loop on the L was wrong, and the lean on the E was insufficient, and whoever had practiced her signature had not had access to enough examples of it in the specific context of formal legal documentation. where her hand moved slightly differently than in casual writing. He had someone practice it, she said. His document specialist, Vivian said, the same person who manages the administrative forgeries for his operation. Identity documents, primarily. Contract alterations. Does this person have a name? Vivian wrote a name on the corner of a blank page, tore it off, slid it across the table. Elena looked at it. She memorized it. She put it in her pocket. The originals, she said. Where are the originals with the forged signatures? In Damien's document archive. Physically, in his office on the 14th floor of the Cross Tower on Michigan Avenue. Digitally, she paused. Digitally, they were uploaded to a secure document management system 3 days ago. I have the access credentials. Elena looked at her. You have access to his document management system. I built part of its structure, Vivian said. I retained a back channel. And you're giving this to me because... Because if I go down for this, Vivian said, I'm going down for what I actually did, not for what Damien decided I should be seen to have done. And because what Damien decided... She stopped. Something moved across her face that was the most human thing Elena had seen from her. I was not told what the third organization was. I would not have... What I built was not built for that. And when I found out, I told him I was out. That I would not continue to run infrastructure for... She stopped again. He responded by adding your name to the documents, and by beginning the process of ensuring that my exposure and your exposure would function as a distributed liability structure that protected his primary position. He used both of us, Elena said. Yes, Vivian said. A silence. Joel reached out and turned one of the documents toward him and looked at it for a moment, then turned it back. The federal filing, Elena said. 72 hours. How solid is that timeline? It may be faster, Vivian said. My source inside the proceeding is not direct, but the indicators... She shook her head slightly. The grand jury has been seated. Witnesses have been called in the last 10 days. The filing is ready. They're waiting on a final authorization. We need to get in front of it, Joel said. Elena looked at him. He was looking at the documents with the focused attention of someone doing rapid structural analysis. If we go to the federal attorney first, he said, not to Elena, to the table, thinking aloud, with documentation of the forged signatures, with Beam's records, with the credential access to the document system. We go proactively, and we go with everything. We control the narrative of her involvement from the first filing. It also means giving up everything we have to a federal proceeding immediately, Elena said. No leverage, no negotiation. What's the alternative? Joel said. Wait for them to file with her name on those documents and spend 3 years proving she didn't sign them. She knew he was right. She had known it before he said it, which was why it landed somewhere different than the intellectual confirmation of a good argument. It landed the way things land when you already know them, and the saying of them out loud makes the path forward undeniable. She looked at Vivian. If we do this, if we go to the federal attorneys, you're coming with us. Vivian looked at her without flinching. I know. You'll be disclosing your role in building the structure. Yes. That has consequences for you. I'm aware of the consequences, Vivian said. I've been aware of them for 6 weeks. I've been talking to my own attorney for the last 9 days. She held Elena's gaze. I'm not coming to you clean. I did things. I built things. I'm going to have to answer for them, and I will. But I will not answer for a forged signature on a beneficial ownership declaration that puts a pregnant woman in a federal filing as a money laundering participant. That is the line. Elena sat with that for a moment. She thought about a woman she had spent the last several months understanding as a specific kind of threat, the particular threat of someone who steps into the space another person has vacated and fills it in ways that make the vacancy feel retroactively permanent. She had constructed Vivian Laurent in her mind as a set of functions: financial architect, social replacement, the person sitting in her seat at the dinner table. She had not constructed her as someone with a line she wouldn't cross. People were more complicated than the roles you assigned them when you were in pain. She knew this. She knew it professionally, clinically, from years of treating people at the worst moments of their lives. She had just apparently needed to be reminded of it in this specific context. Okay, she said, I need to make a call before we move. My attorney. I'll wait, Vivian said. Elena slid out of the booth and walked to the far end of the bar, near the service entrance, where the ambient noise was highest. She called the number Marcus had given her in the truck, a federal defense attorney named Catherine Marsh, who had apparently done this specifically for 22 years, and whom Marcus knew through a connection Elena was not going to ask about right now. Marsh answered on the second ring. Elena talked for 4 minutes. She gave the structure of it, the forged signatures, the timeline, the federal filing window, the witness she had sitting in a hotel bar who had built the financial architecture and was willing to disclose. She gave it fast and without editorializing, and when she finished, there was a brief silence on the line that felt like a sharp legal mind processing large quantities of information at high speed. Don't move, Marsh said. Don't go anywhere. Don't let the witness leave. I'm going to make one call and call you back in 8 minutes. Elena went back to the booth. 8 minutes, she said. Vivian nodded. Joel was looking at his phone. His expression had changed, subtle, the slight tightening around the eyes that meant incoming information he didn't like. What? Elena said. Marcus just texted, Joel said. He looked up. Cross Tower. Security footage from the building system across the street. Daniel's been pulling it. Damien's vehicles left the building 40 minutes ago, multiple passengers. They're mobile. Where? He doesn't know yet. Joel's phone buzzed again. He looked at it. Marcus's house. 2 of Damien's people are parked outside Marcus's house right now. Elena processed this. Damien had known they'd gone to Pilsen. He'd followed the pattern, and now he'd sent people to Marcus's house, not to confront, not yet, but to establish presence, to send a message about what the next hours were going to look like. Her phone rang. Marsh. I've spoken with someone in the relevant federal office, Marsh said without preamble. Without disclosing specifics, I've established that there is a window for proactive cooperation from individuals with direct documented knowledge of the structure under investigation. That window closes when the filing goes. If you can get to my office within 2 hours with your witness and the documentation you described, I can walk you into a conversation that changes the shape of your involvement in this from defendant to cooperating witness providing exculpatory evidence. A pause. This is the only offer of this type, and it expires with the filing. 2 hours, Elena said. 1:45 realistically. Move fast. She lowered the phone. She looked at Vivian. We have under 2 hours to get to my attorney's office with everything you have. Vivian was already reaching for the portfolio. Then we should go. They went. Joel drove, one of the vehicles Marcus had available that wasn't connected to anyone Damien had had time to catalog, while Elena sat in the back with Vivian and the portfolio open between them. Elena going through documents page by page as Joel navigated through midday loop traffic, the forged signatures, the entity structures, printed transaction summaries that Vivian produced from a separate inner pocket of the portfolio showing the flow of funds through each layer of the structure. And at the back, a single page that Elena almost missed, a document that was not financial, not legal, not structural. It was an email, printed, between Damien and his document specialist, dated 3 weeks ago. She read it. She read it again. She looked up at Vivian. He gave him a sample of my signature to work from, she said. He gave him a specific document. Yes, Vivian said. He gave him the marriage certificate, Elena said. The words came out flat. She was hearing herself say them from a slight distance, the way you hear yourself speak when the emotional processing system has reached a load threshold and temporarily offloaded the function. Yes, Vivian said, quieter. Their marriage certificate. The document they had both signed in a judge's office on a Wednesday afternoon with Marcus and Daniel as witnesses, and a woman they'd never met before as the officiant, Damien in a dark suit, and Elena in a blue dress she'd bought the week before because she'd thought the color worked with the light in that room. He had kept a copy of their marriage certificate. He had given it to a forger to extract her signature and replicate it on beneficial ownership declarations for a money laundering structure. He had used the document that defined their legal partnership to perform the act that would potentially destroy her. She folded the email carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, beside Beam's envelope. Joel's phone rang through the car's speakers. Marcus. 2 vehicles left the cross tower heading your direction, Marcus said. I don't have an exact route. They could be going to Marsh's office, or they could be running parallel to you. How would he know where Marsh's office is? Joel said. How did he know where we were in Pilsen? Marcus said. A silence. Her phone, Vivian said. She said it quietly, looking at Elena. He's had a monitor on your number. He's been reading your call patterns since this morning. Elena looked at her phone in her hand. He heard me call Marsh. He would have heard the number dialed, not the content, but he can identify whose number that is. Elena put her phone in her jacket pocket. Then she looked at Joel. He knows where we're going. Yes, Joel said, and he's sending people to intercept. Looks like. She pressed her hands flat on her knees. The baby pushed hard against her right side. Not a roll this time, something more definite. The kind of movement that carried a slight edge of discomfort. She breathed through it. How far are we from Marsh's office? She said. 11 minutes, Joel said. How far are Damien's vehicles? Joel's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen on the dash. Marcus says 8. 8 minutes versus 11. A 3-minute window in which 2 vehicles carrying people sent by Damien Cross would reach their destination before Elena and Vivian. She thought about the portfolio. She thought about Beam's envelope and the email in her jacket. She thought about 145 minutes and a federal cooperation window and a forged signature on a document made from her marriage certificate. She looked at Vivian. Everything in that portfolio. Can you get it transmitted digitally to Marsh right now, before we arrive? Vivian looked at her. Then she opened the portfolio and pulled out a tablet Elena hadn't seen. I can send the digital copies I have. Not everything is digitized. Send what you can, right now. Vivian's hands were already moving. Joel, Elena said. Yeah. Is there a route to Marsh's office that doesn't go through the front entrance? He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, building has a parking structure on the north side. Access from Wabash. Take it. He took it. They came off Lake Street onto Wabash going fast enough that the turn pressed Elena sideways in the seat, and she braced with one hand against the door and kept her eyes forward and did not look at the side mirror. Vivian's fingers were moving across the tablet screen, transmitting. The baby pushed again, harder, and Elena registered it and filed it and kept her attention on the 3 minutes ahead of her. Joel pulled into the parking structure entrance. The gate arm was down. He stopped at the intercom. Tell them Catherine Marsh, Elena said. Tell them her client Elena Voss. Joel pressed the intercom button and said it. A 5-second pause. Then the gate arm rose. They went in. They were in the elevator going up when Elena's phone buzzed one final time in her pocket. She looked at the screen. Damien. Not a call. A text. 4 words. Don't do this, Elena. She looked at the 4 words for a moment. She thought about everything those 4 words contained, the plea inside them, and the threat inside them, and the history inside them, and the particular architecture of a man who had, for 4 years, calibrated exactly how much of himself to show her in order to produce the response he needed from her. She put the phone back in her pocket. The elevator doors opened. Catherine Marsh was standing in the hallway outside her office door, 60 years old, silver-haired, in a charcoal suit that communicated everything necessary about what kind of attorney she was. She looked at Elena, at Vivian, at the portfolio, and her eyes moved with the rapid assessment of someone who had been doing this for 22 years and could tell within seconds whether what she was looking at was workable. Come in, she said, stepping back from the door. They came in. And downstairs in the parking structure, a black SUV came through the gate arm 4 minutes behind them. The hallway outside Catherine Marsh's office was the kind of hallway designed to communicate stability. Gray carpet, framed credentials on the wall, the low, persistent hum of a building that had been built to last. Elena stood just inside the office door while Marsh's assistant set out water glasses and Vivian Laurent laid the portfolio open on the conference table, and she listened to the specific quality of silence from the floor below, where the elevator bank was, where the parking structure connected to the building's service core, where a black SUV had come through the gate arm 4 minutes after them. Marsh looked at Elena. You said there are vehicles in the structure. One that I know of, Elena said. Possibly more. My building has its own security, Marsh said. This floor requires key card access from the elevator. If someone comes up without an appointment, they'll be stopped at reception on 12 and security will be called. She said it without drama, as a structural fact, the way she said most things. What I need from you right now is not to think about who is downstairs. What I need from you is to sit down and walk me through the timeline from the beginning while my associate reviews what Miss Laurent transmitted. A woman Elena hadn't noticed, young, late 20s, with the focused economy of movement that marked someone trying to prove something, was already at a second table with a laptop, pulling up the transmitted documents. Elena sat down. She walked Marsh through it. All of it, from the beginning, in the same sequential flat-effect way she'd told Marcus in the truck, but slower now, more detailed, because detail was what lawyers needed, and detail was what she had. She started with November 3 years and 7 months ago, and she went through every layer. The marriage, the absences, the discovery of the pregnancy, the 6 weeks between telling Damien and the night at the gate, the text from Reeves, Beam's call, the Pilsen meeting, the suburban surveillance, Vivian's call, the portfolio, the email with the document specialist and the marriage certificate. Marsh listened without interrupting. Her associate made notes. Vivian sat across the table and occasionally added technical clarification about the financial structure when Elena's account reached those layers. When Elena finished, Marsh was quiet for approximately 8 seconds. Then she said, "The email, the one between Cross and the document specialist referencing the marriage certificate. Do you have the original?" Elena reached into her jacket and took out the folded email and set it on the table. Marsh looked at it without touching it. "Do you know where the physical originals of the beneficial ownership documents with the forged signatures are held?" "Cross Tower, 14th floor document archive. Vivian can describe the location specifically." Marsh looked at Vivian. "I can," Vivian said. "I can also provide the digital access credentials for the document management system where the scanned copies were uploaded 3 days ago. The upload log will show the date and the user account that uploaded them, which is traceable to the document specialist, not to Elena." Marsh's associate looked up from the laptop. She said to Marsh, "The transmitted documents are consistent with the structure she described. The entity registration dates, the signature page formatting, the beneficial ownership declarations, all consistent. The signature comparison is going to need a forensic document examiner, but visually," she paused, looking at the screen, "the marriage certificate signature and the beneficial ownership signature are from the same practice set. You can see it in the E and the second loop of the L." Marsh looked at Elena. "I'm going to make a call," she said. "It will take approximately 15 minutes. During that time, I need both of you to stay in this room, stay off your phones, and let me work." "There are people in your parking structure who work for Damien Cross," Elena said. "I heard you the first time," Marsh said, and picked up the phone on the conference table. Elena sat back in her chair. Across the table, Vivian Laurent had closed the portfolio and was sitting with her hands folded on top of it, looking at the window, at the gray Chicago sky beyond the glass. She looked like a woman sitting with something she had been carrying for a long time and had not yet set down. Elena watched her for a moment, then she said quietly, so as not to cut across whatever Marsh was saying into her phone, "How long did you know him before this?" Vivian looked at her. 8 years, she said, "as a client." "And you trusted him?" A pause. "I trusted the professional relationship. I understood what he was, and I made choices within that understanding. What I didn't—" She stopped, looked back at the window. "I underestimated what he would do when he felt the structure coming apart. I shouldn't have. I knew what he was capable of." Elena thought about a man she had chosen when she didn't have to. She thought about an emergency room and 2 cups of coffee and a real laugh, and she thought about the particular way you could know something about a person's capacity for real feeling and simultaneously fail to understand what that feeling was attached to and what it would do when it came under pressure. "What do you actually know about his feelings?" Elena said. "Toward me. Whatever your read is, I want to hear it." Vivian looked at her directly. She held the look for a moment, assessing something, whether Elena was asking because she needed comfort or because she needed information. Then, apparently satisfied it was the latter, she said, "I think he chose you deliberately. I think for about 8 months he was genuinely trying to become something different. I saw it. He came to meetings differently during that period. He made decisions differently." She paused. "And then the partnership with the 3 organizations solidified, and the weight of what he'd agreed to became real, and whatever he was trying to become got overtaken by the maintenance of what he'd already built, and you became, she chose the word carefully, evidence of the person he hadn't become, which is a very uncomfortable thing for a man like Damien Cross to have sitting across the breakfast table. Elena absorbed this. It was not a kind thing to hear, but it was true in a way she recognized, the way you recognize something you've known for a long time without quite letting yourself articulate it. "Did he ever say anything to you about her?" Elena said, and then corrected herself. "About the baby." Something happened in Vivian's face. Small, quickly managed. "Yes," she said. "Once. About a week after you told him." "What did he say?" "He said—" Another pause. Longer. "He said he didn't know how to protect something that small in the middle of something this large." She looked at the table. "That was all he said. I didn't respond. There was nothing appropriate to say." Elena looked at the conference table. She thought about a man who had built an enormous, complex, and genuinely dangerous life around himself and was, in some very fundamental way, completely alone inside it. She thought about how she had recognized that aloneness because she had known it, and how she had stepped toward it, and how the stepping toward it had been real on her part, and real on his part, and still produced this: a conference table and forged signatures and a parking structure where his vehicles were waiting. Both things could be true. She understood that now in a different way than she had this morning. Marsh set down the phone. She looked at Elena. "I've spoken with the relevant office. There is a cooperation agreement available to you contingent on your providing the documentation, access to the digital archive, and testimony regarding the forged signatures. Your name would be removed from the initial filing and replaced with a notation of exculpatory evidence provided by a cooperating individual. Your involvement in any proceeding would be as a witness to the forgery, not as a named participant in the underlying structure." She paused. "This is contingent on moving immediately. They want to meet this afternoon." "This afternoon," Elena said. 2:00. Their office, not mine. I'll go with you." Elena looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:53. "I need 20 minutes," she said. "I need to make one call and I need to eat something because I haven't eaten since yesterday, and I'm 8 months pregnant." Marsh looked at her for a moment, the first time she'd done anything that resembled looking at Elena as a person rather than a case. "My assistant will get you something from the kitchen," she said. "Make your call." Elena went to the far end of the conference room and called Marcus. He answered before it finished the first ring. She told him the 2:00 meeting. She told him the cooperation agreement. She told him she needed him to do one thing before then. "Beam's envelope," she said. "The documentation Reeves has been building. The financial analysis from Daniel. I need it all, everything you have, in Marsh's hands in the next hour." "Done," he said. Then after a very brief pause, "Are you all right?" She thought about the question. She was sitting in a law office in the Loop, 8 months pregnant, with a forged signature on federal documents and a black SUV in the parking structure, and a marriage she was about to formally end, and a child turning slowly in the narrowing space of her interior, and she was also the clearest-headed she had been in 6 weeks, which was either a good sign or a worrying one. "Yes," she said. "Bring the documents." She hung up. She ate half a turkey sandwich that Marsh's assistant brought without being asked. She drank water. She sat in the conference room and did not look at her phone and let her body do the maintenance functions it needed to do. And at 12:40, Marcus arrived with Daniel in a folder 2 inches thick. And he looked at Vivienne Laurent across the conference room, and Vivienne looked at him, and neither of them said anything. And then Marcus put the folder on the table in front of Marsh and stepped back. At 1:55, they walked into the federal building on South Dearborn. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Elena sat at a table across from 2 federal attorneys and a forensic accountant, and she answered questions in the same sequential way she'd been answering questions all morning. And Vivienne sat beside her and answered her own questions with the technical precision of someone who had spent a career communicating financial structures to people who needed to understand them quickly. Marsh sat on Elena's other side and intervened when the questions went somewhere that wasn't relevant or productive, which happened 3 times. The forensic document examiner had been given the email and the transmitted signature pages. By the time the meeting ended, her preliminary assessment was already in. The signatures on the beneficial ownership declarations were not consistent with known exemplars of Elena Voss's handwriting across 12 comparison documents and showed consistent with what she described as a practiced replication rather than an original signature. They used the word forgery. They used it in a sentence that had Elena's name in it and the word victim. She had not expected the specific physical sensation that word produced. Not relief, not quite, but something adjacent to it. The particular release of a thing that has been pressing against you that finally moves. At 4:45, Catherine Marsh walked her out of the federal building and they stood on the sidewalk on South Dearborn in the late afternoon, the sky still overcast. The city doing what it always did, regardless of what was happening inside any specific building within it. "What happens now?" Elena said. "The filing goes within 24 to 48 hours, Marsh said. Damien Cross and several associated individuals will be named. Vivienne Laurent has entered into her own cooperation arrangement. The document specialist whose name you have from her," Elena had given Marsh the torn piece of paper in the meeting. "He'll be identified and located." She paused. "Damien will have counsel, obviously. He'll know by tonight what's happened. He'll know you went in." "Yes," Elena said. "How do you want to handle contact?" "Through you," Elena said. "Only through you. From today." "That's the right answer," Marsh said. "Go home. Rest. I'll call you when the filing drops." Elena nodded. She looked at the street. The particular late afternoon Chicago light that existed in the narrow window between the overcast breaking slightly and the dark coming in, a gray gold quality that she had always found specific to this city, the kind of light that looked like effort, like something working. Marcus's Suburban was at the curb. She got in. The federal filing dropped at 9:41 the following morning. Marsh called at 9:43. Elena was sitting at Marcus's kitchen table with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, and she listened to Marsh read her the relevant portions. The named individuals, the counts, the associated civil forfeiture proceedings, and the single footnoted reference to exculpatory evidence provided by a cooperating individual that had resulted in the removal of one previously identified beneficial owner from the filing on grounds of documented forgery. One previously identified beneficial owner. Her name, removed. She set the phone down and looked at the kitchen table and breathed. Outside, someone on the street was arguing with someone else about a parking space, with the heated particularity of people who have too much feeling about small things because it is easier than having feeling about large ones. A dog barked twice. A bus went by. Chicago, ordinary and ongoing. She picked up her mother's journal from the corner of the table where she'd been keeping it within reach since the night at the gate, and she opened it to the last entry and she read the 3 sentences her mother had written on March 4th, and then she turned past them to the blank pages that followed. She had been looking at those blank pages since she was a teenager. The weight of them. Everything her mother hadn't written, hadn't known she wouldn't get to write. She had always understood them as absence. She thought about them differently now. She picked up a pen from the kitchen counter. She sat back down. She put the pen to the first blank page. She didn't write anything yet. She just held the pen there, against the paper, and let the contact be what it was. 3 days later, Damien Cross's attorneys contacted Marsh about divorce proceedings, not the asset protection structure that had been effectively unwound by the federal proceedings, the relevant accounts frozen, the subsidiary entities under court order. Not the money, the marriage. His attorneys requested a meeting. Marsh relayed the request and her recommendation, which was that Elena not attend in person, that everything be conducted through counsel, that no direct communication between the parties occurred during the proceedings. Elena agreed. The proceedings took 11 weeks. She was not in the same room as Damien Cross for any of them. On the 61st day, she received a document through Marsh that required her signature. She read it completely, all 43 pages, and then she signed it in 3 places with the particular deliberate care of someone who knows their signature is meaningful and intends for it to be only theirs. She did not look at the signature for a long time afterward. She folded the document and gave it back to Marsh's assistant and walked out of the office building and stood on the sidewalk and breathed the October air. She was no longer Elena Cross. She had never really been Elena Cross, had kept Voss professionally throughout, had used it daily, had written it on every nursing document and patient record and professional correspondence for the duration of the marriage. But now there was no version of herself that carried his name in any form, even the legal one, even the one no one saw. She stood on the sidewalk and found that the ending of it felt less like subtraction and more like the moment when you finally put down something you've been carrying so long, you stop noticing the weight. The baby arrived on a Thursday, 4 days before her due date, with the particular efficiency of someone who has decided they've waited long enough. Elena was at Marcus's house when it started, in the kitchen, and Marcus drove her to Northwestern Memorial while she sat in the passenger seat and breathed with the measured discipline of someone who has attended enough births to know that the body's job right now was the job she needed to let it do. She thought, going through the automatic doors, about the last time she had come through these doors in a professional capacity. She had worked this floor, these hallways, this specific quality of controlled urgency. She had been the person managing other people through moments like this one, and she had been competent and clear and good at it. She thought about that version of herself and felt something she couldn't quite name, not nostalgia, not quite pride, but the recognition of a continuity. She was still that person. Everything that had happened in the intervening months had not removed that. If anything, it had compacted it, made it more structural, more load-bearing. She was in labor for 9 hours and 40 minutes. Her brothers were in the waiting room, all 4 of them, which she was told by the attending nurse who came to update them and returned with the information that the waiting room contained 4 large men who were being extremely quiet in the way that suggested the quiet required effort. The baby arrived at 3:14 in the morning with a specific and emphatic announcement of her presence that made the attending nurse laugh once, briefly, with the genuine surprise of someone who expected crying and got something that sounded more like insistence. Elena held her daughter and looked at her face, the specific new face of a person who had never been in a room before and was processing the fact of rooms with the complete attention of someone for whom everything is unprecedented. Dark hair, damp, small hands that had spent 9 months in a space that was now, suddenly, much larger and more complicated. Dark eyes that were looking not at Elena specifically, not at anything specifically, but at the fact of the world in general. "Hi," Elena said. Not eloquent, but it was what she had. The baby's hands opened and closed once, both of them, in the small, reflexive motion of a person learning they have hands. Theo came in first because he had apparently made the argument to the others that he was the one most likely to behave appropriately, and the others had, apparently, agreed. He stood in the doorway of the room for a moment, this 29-year-old man who had never learned to keep his face as controlled as his brother's, and he looked at his sister and the child in her arms, and his face did the thing it always did when he felt something too large for his usual management systems. He came in and sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at the baby. "She looks like Mom," he said. Elena looked at her daughter's face. She thought about this. Whether it was true, whether it was the kind of thing people say because they need it to be true, or whether the inheritance of a face was genuinely visible in this specific way so early. She looked and she thought she could see it, maybe, in the set of something around the forehead. Or maybe she wanted to see it. Maybe the line between those two things was thinner than it looked from the outside. "Yeah," she said. "Maybe." The others came in shortly after, one at a time, and stood around the room with the particular diffident gentleness of large men in the presence of something very small, and nobody said anything particularly significant, which was how Elena knew it was significant. Marcus sat for a while. Daniel stood near the window and looked at the street below, rather than at the baby, which was his way of being present without performing presence. Joel said the baby's hands were proportionally very large for her size, which was either a medical observation or an attempt at connection through observation, and was probably both. They left eventually, one by one, and the room went quiet, and the hospital did its particular nighttime thing of going still without going silent. The monitors and the quiet footsteps in the hall and the specific quality of institutional light at 3:40 in the morning. Elena put her daughter on her chest and felt the weight of her, not heavy, but specific in the way that very few things are specific. A weight that had a shape. She put one hand on her daughter's back and felt the rise and fall of breath, new breath, the first 100 breaths of a life. And she looked at the ceiling and was very still. She thought about Damien. She had not seen him since the night at the gate in the rain. She had received, through Marsh, a communication from his legal team during the divorce proceedings, a formal statement regarding his intentions concerning paternity acknowledgement, and financial support of the child, which had been drafted by lawyers and carried no personal language whatsoever. She had read it and filed it. She had not responded personally. There was nothing to respond to that hadn't already been said through the appropriate channels. She thought about what Vivian had said. He said he didn't know how to protect something that small in the middle of something this large. She thought about a man sitting with a federal proceeding closing in on everything he'd built, looking at the fact of his unborn child and finding it too small and too breakable for the particular scale of the world he'd made. She did not forgive him. Forgiveness wasn't the thing she was doing. What she was doing was something more like completing the account, closing the ledger, naming every item in it clearly, and then putting it in a place where it was recorded, but not where it was living, not where she had to step over it every day. He had been real. What they had been real. What he had done had also been real. All three things could be in the same ledger without canceling each other out. The baby's breathing shifted slightly. A small sound, not quite a sound, more like the adjustment of breath that precedes sleep. Elena adjusted her hold fractionally and the baby settled. She thought about Arthur Beam in Columbus, family he hadn't seen enough of while he spent 11 years managing the schedule of a man who fired Paula Reyes at 5 in the morning. She thought about Paula herself. Marsh had told her that Paula had been contacted as a witness in the federal proceedings and had provided a detailed account of the household's operations that had apparently been significant. She thought about Rodrigo Salinas, whose number Elena had gotten from Marsh, and whom she had called and thanked directly, briefly, without excess. The way you thank someone who helped you without knowing they were helping you. She thought about Vivienne Laurent, who had entered a cooperation agreement and was now in a process that would take months and produce consequences she had agreed to face because the line she wouldn't cross had, in the end, been the thing that defined the outer boundary of who she was. Elena did not like Vivienne Laurent. She was not certain she ever would, but she understood her now in a way that she hadn't expected to, and understanding was a different country from liking, but it was a country that had value. She thought about the 3 sentences in her mother's journal and the blank pages that followed. When her daughter was 8 days old, Elena brought her home to the apartment on South Morgan Street that she had moved into 3 weeks before the birth. A second-floor 2-bedroom with high ceilings and good light, and a fire escape that looked out over a narrow alley where someone had planted window boxes in the units across the way. She had painted the second bedroom a soft green that she'd chosen from a sample card, and then second-guessed, and then stood by. And there was a second-hand crib that Daniel had reinforced, and Marcus had checked 3 times, and Theo had assembled while Joel sat beside him, and periodically pointed out that the instructions indicated the bracket went the other way. She carried her daughter up the stairs and unlocked the door with her elbow and went inside. She stood in the middle of the living room for a moment. The apartment was quiet and slightly cold. She'd left a window cracked, and the afternoon light came in through the front windows at an angle that lit the floor in 2 long stripes. She reached out with one foot and closed the window, and the cold air stopped. Her daughter was asleep against her shoulder. She stood there for a while in the middle of the room, in the quiet, in the light. She was 33 years old. She had a nursing license she was in the process of reactivating at Northwestern, where the department head had been direct and kind and had said the position would be there when she was ready, and had meant it. She had an apartment with good light and window boxes visible from the fire escape. She had 4 brothers who had come to the hospital in the middle of the night and sat in a waiting room with the effortful quiet of people who would have done anything else they were asked. She had a daughter who had been in the world for 8 days and had already developed a preference for being held against the left shoulder rather than the right, which Elena had identified on day 3 and accommodated without comment. She had a mother's journal with blank pages in it. She went to the kitchen table, where she'd put the journal when she set up the apartment, had put it there first, before anything else, before the dishes, or the books, or the box with the nursing equipment, had put it on the kitchen table, where she would see it every morning when she came in to make coffee. She sat down. She shifted the baby to the crook of her left arm. She opened the journal past the last page of her mother's writing to the first blank page. She picked up the pen. She wrote a date at the top of the page, the date of her daughter's birth. Beneath it, she wrote her daughter's name, Miriam, after no one in particular, for no reason she could precisely articulate except that the name felt like something solid, like a name that would hold weight without breaking. Beneath the name, she wrote nothing else. She just looked at it. The date and the name in her own handwriting on the first blank page of her mother's unfinished journal, and the particular quality of that, the continuation of it, the fact that the blank pages were no longer absence but beginning, settled into her in the slow, definitive way that real things settle. Outside on South Morgan Street, someone was calling to someone across the street. A name, twice, the ordinary small urgency of a neighborhood mid-afternoon. A car went by. A child on the sidewalk below said something in a voice too high to parse, and an adult voice responded with the specific patience of someone who has answered the same question 40 times and will answer it 40 more. Miriam's breathing was slow and even against Elena's shoulder. Elena put the pen down. She closed the journal. She held her daughter in the good light and did not think about anything in particular for a while, which was something she had not been able to do for 6 weeks or several months or possibly longer than that, the quiet just being quiet without anything underneath it. The afternoon moved the way afternoon moves when you are not fighting it. She was still sitting there when she heard the key in the door, Marcus's key. She had given him a copy, had given all 4 of them copies because she was not performing self-sufficiency she didn't feel, and she was not going to refuse the help of people who had never stopped offering it just because accepting help had once been a point of pride. The door opened and Marcus came in with a paper bag that smelled like the restaurant 3 blocks over that he'd identified within 48 hours of her moving in, the way Marcus identified things, systematically and without announcement. He looked at her at the kitchen table with the baby on her shoulder and the journal in front of her. He set the bag on the counter. He did not say anything. She looked at him. He looked at her. The afternoon light was still doing its thing with the floor. "You eat?" he said. "Not yet." He started taking things out of the bag. She watched him move around her kitchen with the ease of a man who has always known where things were in whatever kitchen she occupied because he was the one who had always put things there when she was too young or too tired or too newly arrived somewhere to do it herself. Miriam made a small sound, not quite a sound, the adjustment before the deeper settling, and then went quiet again. Elena put her hand on the journal. She thought about her mother sitting at the kitchen table on Loomis Street on March 4th, tired, writing 3 sentences, not knowing. She thought about what her mother had written. "I don't know what I would have done without them." She thought, "I know exactly what that means now." She thought, "I always knew what it meant. I just needed to be reminded in the particular way that only certain years can remind you." She looked at her daughter's face. At the familiar features she was still in the process of learning, at the specific gravity of a person who has not yet learned to perform anything and therefore performs nothing, who is only, completely, entirely what they are. "Thank you," she said, to Marcus, to the room, to the afternoon light moving across the floor toward the west where the day was going. Marcus set a container of soup on the table in front of her without comment. She picked up the spoon. Outside on South Morgan Street, the city continued, ordinary and ongoing, the way it always had and would, indifferent to any individual story within it, and yet somehow containing all of them, all the people in their apartments and their cars and their arguments about parking spaces, and their children calling to each other across the street, all the lives running parallel and perpendicular, and occasionally, briefly, together. Elena Voss ate her soup in the afternoon light with her daughter on her shoulder, and her mother's journal on the table in front of her, and the story was not about what had been done to her anymore. It had not been about that for some time. It was about this kitchen, this light, this child, this ordinary Thursday in October when nothing significant was happening and everything that mattered was already here.